This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you are watching Fault Lines. The topic for today's program is Afghanistan at crossroad of peace talks. Government and Taliban are in talks aimed at finding an end to decade-long conflict, even as hopes wane and fear grows over a spike in violence across Afghanistan, with combatants on both sides blaming each other. There are rising expectations from new administration in Washington, D.C., who have promised to bring peace in Afghanistan as a top priority. A former Afghan government advisor said that the government and Taliban are two warring minorities, with Afghanistan people being caught in the middle. One say they represent the republic, the others say they want to end foreign occupation and corruption. But the war is all about power. The stop-and-go talks process continues amid growing doubts over a US-Taliban peace deal brokered by last President Donald Trump. While world wants to know the fact of Afghan peace process under President Biden, let's hear about his own plans in his own words.
There is a plan in place for a deal to be signed at the end of the month after this pause in violence or reduction in violence. I remember when the Obama administration sought a deal with the Taliban. The Trump administration is now on the verge of signing one.
Which we know nothing about. Look, I opposed the surge in the first place, number one. I didn't think we should have even the troops we sent there. Number, it's all been made public now, that we should have the troops in the first place that were sent there. And I don't even think we should have had the number of troops, which is considerably less than the president, this president added. I think we should only have troops there to make sure that it's impossible for the Taliban, for ISIS or Al-Qaeda to reestablish a foothold there, to be able to go from Afghanistan to the United States to attack the United States. That requires a much smaller footprint. But as I understand it, we're not drawing down to a level that was even as low as it was when we left Afghanistan.
About 8,600 is the number of troops.
And so we'll see. I mean, it's a little premature to make the judgment whether or not this is a good deal or not a good deal.
The small foothold which he was mentioning is now merely a presence of 2,500 US soldiers. The US government has requested Pakistan to assert its role in the peace process as the facilitator. When asked by USIP, US Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, had said,
"We always would like Pakistan, like other countries, to do more, but we appreciate what they have done so far. And I have indicated, and Secretary Pompeo and the President, that we want to have good relations with Pakistan, better relations with Pakistan, and that what they do on Afghanistan to facilitate peace and reconciliation, which has been a burden on the relationship, that will be removed. And Pakistan is an important country with which we want to have better relations."
While Pakistan has always been blamed by international community for not supporting the current regime in Afghanistan wholeheartedly, Prime Minister Imran Khan had made a major statement during his interview at Washington, D.C.
We believe that we should not ever interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. Let the Afghans decide what they want, what sort of government they want, and we should facilitate the peace process. So this is the big difference now. Okay. We are all on the same page.
There is a little evidence that the Kabul government will be willing to share power, or that Taliban will be flexible on who would be acceptable in transitional administration. The Afghan government wants a ceasefire as a top priority on the agenda, while Taliban want to discuss power sharing with some commitments. To how a post-war Afghanistan might look like, and to discuss this at length, we are today joined by a prestigious panel of guests. Today's program, I have with me Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director, Wilson Center, a leading think tank based in Washington, D.C., and Professor Shi Mong, a representative of Pashto Service of China Media Group. He is author of several books and many research papers. Welcome to the program. Michael, what is your thought about the peace process during these talks? Have anything improved recently?
I think it is unfortunate that the best possible outcome in Afghanistan is the least likely outcome, and that is, of course, a peace deal, a successful peace process leading to a political settlement where the war ends, and Afghanistan is finally able to move forward, and Afghanistan's regional partners, including Pakistan, are able to make investments in Afghanistan, contribute to connectivity projects, infrastructure projects, and all of that. But I think we can all agree it's going to be very difficult to get a peace deal anytime soon, if at all, in Afghanistan. Certainly, there is a significant peace dividend and a significant advantage for Pakistan and other countries in the region if there is a peace deal. It would enable the region to theoretically to partner together on investments, on infrastructure projects. China, of course, would want to extend the Belt and Road Initiative and CPEC into Afghanistan. And obviously, if you have the end of the war, if there's no more conflict, then for Pakistan and other neighboring countries of Afghanistan, they would not have to worry about issues like the drug trade, refugee flows, cross-border terrorism. Presumably, all of those problems, or not problems, all of those issues would go away. Again, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see any type of peace deal anytime soon. But if we want to be optimistic, I think that we could look to that idea of a peaceful Afghanistan as a spark for all types of things, not just peace, but also more prosperity, more infrastructure, more cooperation, and more trust within the region. And the interesting thing is that this means that countries like Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan, maybe even India, would be able to work together to promote connectivity and trade, allowing for better access to Central Asia and so on. The question is whether the U.S. would be involved in this whole story. The U.S., as it turns out, does not get along with most of Afghanistan's neighbors, Iran, Russia, China. So it's unclear if it would be involved. I think that there would be a separate track in which the U.S. would continue to expand its relationship with India. India for the United States is really its biggest strategic bet in South Asia. The U.S., regardless of what happens in Afghanistan, will continue to pursue partnership with India because of their shared goal of countering China. And that will continue no matter what is going on in Afghanistan. It's a separate issue. But let's hope there's a peace deal in Afghanistan, because it'll bring so many benefits to so many countries in so many different contexts. I certainly hope it can happen, but it's going to be unlikely.
Michael, we understand the government in Afghanistan is still weak. They are not very strong as yet. Would it be wise to leave Afghanistan to this government altogether?
So once U.S. forces have left Afghanistan, I think at that point, its role in the peace process, if it is continuing at that point, will be rather limited. So, certainly I do think that there is a fairly likely scenario that we reach a point where all U.S. forces have left Afghanistan, and the Taliban, instead of focusing on the negotiating table and trying to work out a deal with the Afghan government, instead the Taliban responds to the departure of U.S. forces by turning its full attention to the battlefield, where it would have a significant advantage. The Taliban knows that when all U.S. forces and all NATO forces have left Afghanistan, they'll have a significant battlefield advantage. They'll know that the Afghan forces will no longer be able to look to backup support and air power support from NATO forces. And so the Taliban could well just pick up the fight and move into cities and seize territory. And obviously that would violate the U.S. Taliban agreement. But I think once U.S. forces have left, I really don't know to what extent the U.S. government would continue to engage on the peace process. It may try to, but it wouldn't really have any leverage once all of those forces have once all of those U.S. forces have left Afghanistan. So I think that for the U.S., much of its leverage, much of its diplomacy in Afghanistan with the peace process will happen when it still has a true presence in Afghanistan, and only when it still has a true presence in Afghanistan.
Michael, I'll hold you here for a while. Professor Shi, you have been covering this Afghan war for over 10 years now. You just heard what Michael said. Would you agree with his statement? And do you think that US would be withdrawing from Afghanistan and would just be reminding the peace promises to both the sides in case things go wrong from here onward?
Thank you very much, Shabhat Ali, for having me on Fault Lines. It's such a pleasure. I think the peace process in Afghanistan has made significant progress. But the process is also fragile. Since the September 11 incident in 2001 and the invasion of Afghanistan by the US, the war has lasted for nearly 12 years. All parties now have realized that relying on military means alone can neither achieve lasting peace nor achieve their own interests in Afghanistan. The problem of Afghanistan can only be solved through negotiation, which is the only choice for Afghanistan's predicament. After 10 rounds of tortuous negotiations, Mr. Halizad and Mr. Balodat signed a peace agreement in Doha on February 29 last year. After that, the negotiations between the Taliban and the Afghan government began in Doha on September 12. The historic face-to-face internal peace talks are aimed at finding a political solution to the 20-year conflict, marking a new stage in the process of peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, unfortunately, the process of peace talks has not laid a foundation for alleviating the root causes of conflicts, nor has it established a stable and effective political system, security, governance mechanism, economic progress, and the rule of law to avoid new forms of conflicts and build a successful country. In this case, peace talks often fail, so that peace could become a prelude to all kinds of new conflicts.
Michael, you just heard what she believes about this entire process. But I have a frank question from Islamabad. You know that Pakistan has an imperative role in this entire process. But frankly, what is there for Pakistan? Because we have been abandoned in Afghanistan in the past as well. How do you think of it?
It's true that the impending withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan raises a lot of questions about the future of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. In Washington, the relationship with Pakistan has long been viewed through the lens of Afghanistan. And so that raises the question of when the U.S. is no longer present in Afghanistan, what does that mean for the U.S. relationship with Pakistan? Now, skeptics would say, well, this means that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship will really struggle to continue because there'll be no anchor to keep it moving. But I think optimists, and I'm one of these people, optimists would argue that, well, once we've moved beyond the period when the U.S. is in Afghanistan, there'll be an opportunity to broaden the relationship. And I know this is what Islamabad is looking for. There'll be an opportunity for the two sides to look at expanding their economic partnership and their trade relationship. And that may be the case, but I think the unfortunate thing is that it's quite likely that when the U.S. leaves Afghanistan, Afghanistan will become very unstable. There could be a civil war. The Taliban will make major progress on the battlefield. If there's not any type of peace deal in Afghanistan, you could well have the Taliban taking over cities and even threatening to take over the Afghan government again. And I think that Pakistan will become very distracted by that. I just think it could be difficult for there to be an opportunity for the U.S. and Pakistan to be broadening their relationship into non-security areas like economic partnership if Pakistan has to deal with the reality of an increasingly destabilized Afghanistan, including an Afghanistan that could well be taken over by the Taliban again. So I think that ultimately the trajectory of U.S.-Pakistan relations really will depend on the situation in Afghanistan. If there is, by some miracle, a peace deal in Afghanistan and the country becomes more stable, then there'll be a lot of potential for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship to take off without that distraction in Afghanistan. But if the U.S. leaves Afghanistan and there's destabilization and civil war in Afghanistan, I think it could be very difficult for there to be an opportunity for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship to grow out and expand.
For the Afghan government, the peace talks or an accord would mean to give away some of their powers to Taliban. For Taliban, it's a win-win situation. Whatever they gain from this point onward would be a gain into their granted status. Do you think Afghan government is actually very interested to go forward from this point by giving away some of their powers?
I have no doubt about the sincerity of the Afghan government to achieve peace and their possible concessions. The war in Afghanistan cost a lot, and all parties, including the US and the Taliban, hope to end the war as soon as possible. Regional and foreign countries also firmly support the peace process and the post-war reconstruction of Afghanistan. But the war is never over. The reasons include not only the strategic failure of the US, the interest competition of relevant external forces, and the reverse pull-in of various factions in Afghanistan, but also the failure of the Afghan government in national governance, as well as the extremism and the threat of violence of the Taliban. Considering the differences and the gaps between the two sides of ongoing negotiations on key issues, including civil rights and freedom, future power distribution, and the amendment of the national constitution, the internal negotiations in Afghanistan will be complex and lasting. Since the opening of the internal negotiations in Afghanistan, with the increase of violence by armed groups, the positive mood, domestic and abroad, has changed now. So, whether the internal peace talks can end the conflicts in Afghanistan and achieve lasting peace remains to be tested by history.
Thank you very much, Professor Shi. You took time out. Thank you very much for participating from Beijing. Michael Kugelman, I'm grateful for your participation from Washington, D.C. We will take a short break and join with some more guests in our program. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the program. I am now joined by two veteran Afghan journalists. From Federal Republic of Germany, I have Imran Feroz, who is author of a book as well as an expert in Afghan affairs. And from United Kingdom, I have Sami Yusuf, who's covering Afghan war since 1996. Welcome to the program. Sami, my first question. Afghan government want a complete control of the territory. Taliban are looking to share some power. How do you see this will go forward from here?
Look, since 4.5 months, Afghan government peace and reconciliation team is in Doha. Taliban negotiation team is there. And they met many times each other, but they couldn't reach to an agreement, even to start a proper negotiation. They couldn't agree on an agenda. I think there is a huge mistrust and huge differences. The Afghan government says our priority is to save and secure the last 20 years of progress, women development, media development, and human values, and democracy in Afghanistan. But the Taliban insist on an Islamic regime, which they couldn't really explain the look-like of their Islamic regime. So I think both sides on the table, they have very different approaches, and I don't think the Doha will really create a result. So, and there is more chances that the both sides will not reach any agreement. So in that situation, the United Nations through OIC and the neighbor countries might adopt a peace formula in offer to both sides. And so I think due to the American pressure, international community pressure, they agreed to continue the talks, but both sides, Afghan government and Taliban, doesn't have really concrete mindset to move forward and end this ugly war, and which is getting worse day after day, and especially most of the victims are Afghan civilians.
Sami, Afghanistan's peace talks have taken a new turn very recently when United States started negotiating directly with Taliban, bypassing the Afghan government. This was the tendency of Donald Trump administration, and we see the same negotiation team at play so far. Do you think Joe Biden will change this equation any further, or will there be a change in the US's strategy to engage in dialogue with Taliban?
American new regime, a new president also doesn't have much options regarding Afghanistan, and I think they will review and reassess the American and Taliban deal. But of course, the new establishment might have a new approach to find out whether the Taliban really cut ties with Al Qaeda. I think there is no Al Qaeda or such elements left behind in Afghanistan. But still, the Joe Biden administration will insist to make sure there is no link and contacts between Taliban and Al Qaeda or international terrorist groups. At the same time, the Biden administration also concerned about the human rights and human values. The way Trump and Khalilzad signed a deal with the Taliban, they didn't really listen to the voices of the Afghan media, Afghan women, and Afghan civil society, and they were in a rush to sign a deal. But in the American news government, they might rethink about that if we are leaving Afghanistan, what's going to happen next? And definitely without a political solution, withdrawal of the American troops would be a disaster for everyone, even for America.
Imran, I will come to you now. Tell me, Biden is more worried about Al Qaeda and ISIS in Afghanistan, but we see on negotiation table we're talking to Taliban, and it is them who have the ground hold. How serious actually is the threat of Al Qaeda and ISIS in Afghanistan?
I think, when it comes to how serious is the threat, I think the Al Qaeda threat is extremely limited. It's extremely limited, and actually nobody can really answer to you how many Al Qaeda fighters are on the ground in Afghanistan and what are they doing, where are they hiding, what are they capable of doing, and it's something. I have seen the highest NATO officials who couldn't answer if 440 or 400 or 4,000 Al Qaeda fighters are in Afghanistan or not. They cannot give you proper information, and it hasn't changed until today. So I think there is a possibility that indeed Al Qaeda figures are hiding in Afghanistan, but I don't think that they really have much impact on what is going on. Regarding ISIS, it's different. Regarding ISIS, we can see that this terrorist group is capable of conducting huge massacres, and although they are small in contingent, they are capable of doing
horrible things. And during the last years, we could also witness how they become one of the main enemies of the Taliban, because in many areas the Taliban were fighting ISIS. There were even these rumors in Western media that the Americans supported the Taliban war against ISIS through airstrikes and stuff. And here we can see, first of all, if these things are true, you can see how questionable American involvement in Afghanistan has been through the last 40 years. And at the same time, you can also see that in Washington, there are people who say we can get along with the Taliban, but we can not get along with ISIS. And I think the problem with ISIS is that it will not vanish. It's there. It might even become stronger, because ISIS in Iraq and Syria has become very weak. And in Afghanistan, it might become stronger. It might continue attacking minorities. And people who are recruited by ISIS are often educated urban Afghans, it seems. So we have a clear radicalization problem here within Afghan society. The other thing is that even if we have a proper deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and the war between these two forces will stop, ISIS will not vanish. ISIS will continue to stay in Afghanistan, and it will make trouble. And the thing is that I personally have the fear that a lot of these young Taliban fighters who are very radicalized might not be happy about such a deal. And I think there is a possibility that they are going to join ISIS in Afghanistan if the Americans, the Afghan government, and everyone are not capable to absorb them properly and give them opportunity.
Imran, but the problem between the two sides is the deficit of the trust. Do you see any immediate improvement in that? Because without trust, they cannot go forward from here.
Difficult to say if the trust has been increased between the two sides. We should also ask ourselves how many sides we have here. Sometimes I have the impression that the representatives of the Afghan government in Qatar do not really represent the Afghan government of Ashraf Ghani, because they tend to say contradictory things. When it comes to trust, I don't believe that the Taliban trusts the highest circles of the Afghan government, especially the close circle of President Ghani is always being accused of being pro-war. And, people say they're not interested in political solution. They fear to lose their power. And I think we have to consider that. On the other side, I think that many people within the Afghan government, including the negotiation team of the Afghan government in Qatar, believe that the Taliban are also not interested in a peaceful solution, and that in fact they want to take over the whole of Afghanistan after the foreign troops left. So I think that it will take a lot of time, unfortunately, to deconstruct this mistrust.
Imran, at the moment, what is the power equation between Taliban and the government? Because we sitting here do not know who holds what and where. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Difficult to say sometimes, but I have the feeling that it's kind of a 50-50, and there are many contested areas. So, but we cannot deny the reality that the Taliban are controlling large parts of the country, and that the Afghan government has a very limited control and a very problematic structure. I think that in terms of structure, sometimes on the ground the Taliban even benefit, because they are able to solve problems of people in rural areas. That's what you hear when you talk with many of these people. They keep saying that the Afghan government structures are very, very corrupt, and when they go to the Taliban court, the stuff is easily handled. So why is this happening? Obviously, the Taliban are using this for their own benefit, but why do we have such problems? Why do we have, after 20 years, such corrupt institutions within Afghanistan? And why has nation building failed in such a way that the militant group could take such advantage of it? I think that these questions need to be asked and answered.
Sami, it is believed that Pakistan has a great influence on Taliban, and this is what makes Pakistan a very critical part of this entire process. What do you think of it?
I think the Pakistani influence has always been exaggerated on Taliban. Of course, the Taliban is hiding among the million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, no doubt. Now, since everyone is making relation and contacts with the Taliban, China, Russia, Uzbekistan, even America, Norway, Germany, so the Pakistan is also trying to be in touch, in contact, in regular contact with the Taliban. But I don't think so. The Taliban is listening to anyone. And of course, the Pakistan has some influence, but that is enough. And I don't think so. Whatever the Ashraf Ghani and Afghan government demanding Pakistan to pursue the Taliban to go for a ceasefire in the initial stage of the peace talks. So I don't think so. The Pakistan will be able to deliver, although the Pakistan publicly and everyone requested the Taliban and suggested the Taliban to enter the proper peace talks and go for the reduction of violence and ceasefire, but Taliban is denying and Taliban is not listening to anyone. And the Pakistan is worried as much the Taliban is denying the ceasefire, that much international community believe that the Taliban will never be reconciled because if the Taliban has any intention to go for reconciliation and political process, then they need to reduce the violence and gradually convert the Taliban from a military group to a political group. But I don't see there is any great enthusiasm among the Taliban to convert from a military group to political group or political party. So that's why the international community doubts about the Taliban peace intention, and they believe the Taliban just waiting for the American withdrawal, and then they wanna recapture Kabul and establish once again a harsh Islamic emirate like they established in 1996.
Imran, in an Afghanistan where there is no US forces, there are no peacekeeping troops, do you think a long-term peace would be sustainable?
Generally speaking, I think that international forces cannot save Afghanistan. I don't think that American forces, we have a few thousand American forces left in Afghanistan, I don't think that they will make much of a difference. We have seen more than 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, and they were not capable of bringing peace or more democracy or whatever they were supposed to do. So the problem here is a bit more complex, I think. I think that on the one side, what could happen, and that would be really problematic, is more involvement from regional forces, and to be more specific, from Iran and India, who would try to use Afghanistan as their battlefield. In fact, they are already doing that, but I have the fear that this would increase after total troop withdrawal. And because apparently some of these forces might come to the conclusion that the total withdrawal of American troops will mean that the Western world isn't interested in Afghanistan anymore, so we can use it as a battlefield. This is a thing that many Afghans, I think, are fearing, and to prevent that this happens, we need, we need to involve all these forces into negotiations, and we need to include them, and we also have to try to make these states and forces guarantee the Afghan people that they are not going to use this for their own benefits. I think that especially within the Afghan government, many people believe that Pakistan doesn't have the will to do that. And I think that it's not just the case with Pakistan, but also with other forces like Iran and India. And indeed also Russia and China, and all of them have to play a vital role to stop the war in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Imran Feroz. Thank you, Sami Yusuf, for taking out time for our program. We'll take a short break from here and we'll join back in a while. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Fault Lines. I have with me in my studio Mr. Awais Ghani, who is ex-governor of KP, ex-governor of Balochistan, and has authored 4 books as well as several research papers. Awais Ghani sir, welcome to my program.
Thank you.
Before we start talking about Afghan peace prospects, I have 2 research papers that I have read for this program. And the first one that I would mention here is about Afghan reconciliation, path to peace or bridge to nowhere. You wrote it in November 2017. The research paper says that you're not very hopeful about the prospects of peace in Afghanistan. Your thoughts now on this?
Well, to be honest, I'm still not very hopeful because the Afghan conflict is now over 4 decades old, and it is now in a highly complicated situation. And at this present moment in time, Afghan end of conflict, of the Afghan conflict, and peace and reconciliation is entirely dependent on the willingness of the 3 major factions in this conflict.
But have the last 3 presidents of United States not being saying that overtly that they want to get out of Afghanistan? Obama said this, Donald Trump made it a center of his policies, and now Joe Biden is coming into the White House with the same promise. You still doubt the exit of America from Afghanistan?
Our elders told us that in geopolitics, you do not judge nations by their words, which are almost always a smokescreen, but by their actions, which indicate their true aims. So, judging by the actions and the situation on the ground, I am not.
You're not optimistic.
I am not optimistic.
The troops in the troops in Afghanistan have been brought down to a number of 2,500 only. They retain their basic air bases. What else do you want to see in terms of action for the US to convince you that they want to get out of Afghanistan?
You see, reduction of troops can always be reversed also. They have a base, they have a foothold, and I also the modern technology, military technologies, etc., also give that one advantage, that you do not have to have too many people, too many boots on the ground, and you can maintain a certain level of conflict. So I would, whatever they say, I would take it with a pinch of salt, because you see the three factions which are involved in the Afghan conflict: the United States, the Americans, the Afghan government faction and its political allies, and the Afghan Taliban. I believe that looking at their past record and their present actions, that none of them is greatly inclined towards end of conflict. Each one of them wants peace or end to the conflict on their terms. They are not willing to compromise, and that, I believe, is not enough commitment.
Wasab, you wrote in 2014, Beyond Routine, a proposal for a special relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And here you said that the political picture has been distorted by the invaders in Afghanistan. How do you comment on this, please?
The Afghan conflict, the nature of the Afghan conflict, it's very important that we understand that. The Afghan conflict has all along been a civil war. A civil war between what I would term as westernized modernists versus the religious traditionalist ideologies and factions within Afghanistan. Before the 1978 Saur revolution in Afghanistan, there was a socio-political compact within Afghanistan, which the Afghans term as the Misaki-Milli, in which these forces were living together as in the same country as compatriots. And the Misaki-Milli of Afghanistan was ensured by the Durrani monarchy, which acted as a pivot of this Misak, of this socio-political compact. But in the Saur revolution, the Durrani monarchy was eliminated, slaughtered by a Soviet-trained Afghan military, and that destroyed the pivot of that Misak. And that over 2 centuries old Misaki-Milli of Afghanistan shattered and unraveled. I recall experts on Afghanistan at that stage saying that Afghanistan will take another 100 years to build a new Misak. Okay. And if you look back, 42 years have passed, 58 years are remaining. So unless that civil war is resolved and a new socio-political compact emerges, this conflict will continue.
But a Misak is in negotiations at Doha while we speak to each other. How do you comment on it? Is it all going to be a smokescreen?
No, that Doha, let me explain. All the three factions need to, for appearance's sake, need to pay lip service to peace and to ending the conflict. But their geopolitical, political and economic interests dictate to them that for the moment this conflict should continue. And I'll just explain to it briefly. The Americans' policy, US policy in this region is going to be China-centric.
China-centric?
China-centric.
Okay.
It is highly unlikely that the Americans will leave an open field to the Chinese to extend their political, economic and diplomatic influence into this region and then beyond into the Middle East region, which is highly important to the Americans. And therefore the Americans would like to retain a foothold, and it is quite convenient for them to stay on the pretext of combating terrorism. And therefore, apart from minor adjustments like and a little bit of posturing for peace like Doha process, etc., they will continue, I believe, to retain a foothold in Afghanistan.
So you being a Pushtun yourself,
Yes.
you being served as governor to province, understand this culture of negotiations and arbitration in the Pushtun society.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Taliban in Afghanistan are being represented by the right Mashran, the right elders, who can actually give a say on behalf of the entire fighting factions?
I believe so, yes. The Taliban, you see, why do the Taliban, may not be very eager for peace also? You see, the Taliban, there are multiple reasons. The Taliban's strategy of waiting out the Americans is working for them. They now control over 50% of Afghanistan and their influence is expanding. Just lately, they have been handed a major diplomatic victory in which their legitimacy has gone sky high by the Americans sitting directly across the table and talking to them.
Bypassing the
it
Afghan
was,
government.
and in which the Afghan government faction was totally ignored. And to me, which was a surprise, because I don't know why the Americans did that, but they really gave a huge boost to the Taliban.
Sir, I have last 2 minutes. Does Pakistan to date have a good influence on Taliban as expected by the Americans?
No, Pakistan's role is peripheral. It can be only supportive. And Pakistan will support any initiative for reconciliation and peace, etc. in Afghanistan. Afghan Taliban have always been independent. I know that well. And of course, the Taliban will participate in every peace initiative because it gives a boost to their legitimacy. But you see, their strategy is working very well for them. And the Afghan government faction's image is being undermined by the Americans themselves. So unless the Taliban are are given what they really want. For example, they say that they should accept the Afghan constitution. Why should they accept the Afghan constitution? The Afghan constitution is itself dysfunctional. The extra constitutional arrangement of the duality of the president and the chief executive is not in the Afghan constitution. So why should they accept it? And secondly, they say that they should, stop attacks and reduce violence. Now that is their main trump card.
So you believe they have nothing to lose from this
They
point
have nothing
onward?
to lose, they have everything to gain, and they are gaining. And as far as the Afghan government faction is concerned, they are also not too eager, because Afghan government's very existence, their military's very existence, the bureaucracy, etc., and the political elites' existence depends on American support and American funding. And if there is end of conflict and peace and reconciliation, that would mean the exit of Americans and
But
the loss of funding.
funding is not going anywhere. The support is not going anywhere.
I agree with you, but for other reasons, not for this reason. Why are the Americans talking directly to the Afghan Taliban? They have realized where the power lies. And so they are working out something, and they will work out something. But you see, even if the Americans exit, the Afghan conflict will not end, because it's a civil war which must be resolved. And both foreign interventions have actually distorted the normal process. Civil war is a political process, and they would have been resolved much earlier if there had been no foreign intervention. And if the Americans exit, the civil war will continue, and I feel it should be allowed to run its natural course.
Thank you very much, Awais Sahab, and thank you very much for all of my guests who have participated in today's program. So the Afghan peace process continues. There are expectations from every side, and we are watching what is going to happen next. How does Biden administration is going to take this on from this point onward? Keep watching our program every week, and until then, Allah Hafiz.